There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from spending your entire life trying to be enough for someone who is never going to let you be. You probably can't name the moment it started. It wasn't one incident. It was 1,000 small moments, a look of disappointment, a withdrawn silence, a compliment that somehow turned into a critique before it finished landing. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking yourself what you wanted. You started asking yourself what they needed. What mood were they in? What version of them would be walking through that door today? Here's the thing. No one ever told you that wasn't love failing. That was a child doing the only thing they could surviving. And you are still surviving it now. You just don't always recognize it as that. There is a woman, let's call her Maya. 31 years old, successful by every visible measure. She has a career she worked incredibly hard for, a partner who genuinely loves her, and friends who would show up for her without hesitation. And yet most mornings she wakes up with a quiet dread she can't explain. She second-guesses emails before she sends them. She rehearses conversations in her head before they happen. When her partner goes quiet for an evening, her body tenses like something terrible is coming. She doesn't understand why she can't just relax. Why she can't receive love without waiting for it to be taken away. Why, even when life is objectively good, there is a low hum of unworthiness running underneath everything, like a frequency she can't switch off. She hasn't yet connected it to the childhood home. She hasn't thought about consciously in years. She hasn't yet realized that the nervous system she is living in today was built inside that house, calibrated, shaped, and quietly carved by someone who was supposed to help her feel safe in the world. Maya isn't unusual. There are millions of her. There may be one watching this right now. Here is what most people never realize about growing up with a narcissistic parent. The damage doesn't look like damage, not to the child living it, and not to the world watching from the outside. It looks like a high-achieving kid who works twice as hard as everyone else. It looks like someone who is endlessly thoughtful, impossibly accommodating, almost preternaturally attuned to the emotional states of people around them. From the outside, these look like gifts. From the inside, they are survival strategies dressed up as personality traits. And the difference between those two things is the entire story. A narcissistic parent, whether they carry a clinical diagnosis or simply possess those traits in deep, consistent patterns, cannot actually see their child. Not fully. Not the way a child needs to be seen. They see a reflection. They see an extension. They see something that makes them look good or something that threatens to make them look bad. The child cycles between these two poles, favored or failing, special or invisible, and never quite understands the criteria for either. What the child learns, deep in their nervous system before they have language for it, is that love is not a given. Love is a performance, and the performance never quite ends. That lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It moves with you. It shapes how you walk into a room, how you read silence, how you respond to criticism, how you feel in your own skin when no one is watching. And this is where it gets deeper. Because the secondary effects, the patterns that develop downstream from that original conditioning, are where most people spend their entire adult lives, confused and suffering without knowing why. The people-pleasing, for instance. Most people think people-pleasing is about being nice. It isn't. It is a finely calibrated survival mechanism developed by a child who learned that anticipating and managing another person's emotional state was the closest thing to safety they had access to. When you could read the room fast enough, when you could soften your presence, or redirect the conversation, or simply disappear before the storm arrived, you reduced the danger. You were not being kind, you were being smart, you were doing the only thing that worked. The problem is that the brain doesn't automatically retire survival strategies when the danger passes. It keeps running them. And so you arrive in adulthood still managing everyone's moods, still shrinking yourself in rooms where you don't need to, still apologizing before anyone has accused you of anything. Here is what most people never realize about hypervigilance: the constant scanning, the reading of every micro-expression, the inability to fully relax even in safe environments. It isn't anxiety in the ordinary sense, not at its root. It is a nervous system that was trained to treat unpredictability as a threat. Because in your childhood home, unpredictability was a threat. Your parents' mood could shift without warning. The rules could change overnight. What earned warmth on Monday could earn punishment on Tuesday. Your nervous system learned to stay on high alert because high alert was rational. It kept you from being caught off guard. The exhaustion you feel, that bone deep, inexplicable tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, is the exhaustion of a nervous system that has been standing guard for 20, 30, 40 years without permission to stand down. And that is only the beginning of what lives underneath this. The part that surprises people most, the part most content about this topic doesn't reach, is what narcissistic parenting does to your relationship with your own inner world. Children who grow up in narcissistic homes learn, very early, to distrust their own perception. Gaslighting isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it is just a pattern, a parent consistently responding to your emotional reality with dismissal. You were upset, but apparently you were overreacting. You were hurt, but apparently you were too sensitive. You saw what happened, but apparently you were imagining things. Do that to a child consistently enough, and they stop trusting what they see and feel. They begin outsourcing their sense of reality to others. They ask, "Is this normal?" Far more than they should ever have to. They doubt themselves even when they're right, especially when they're right. And then there is the relationship between self-worth and achievement that develops in these homes. Because narcissistic parents frequently love conditionally warmth that is available when you perform, when you achieve, when you make them look good, children learn to tie their value to their output. The result is an adult who is often genuinely impressive to the outside world, and genuinely hollow on the inside, who cannot rest, who cannot accept a compliment without immediately deflecting or minimizing, who reaches the goal they set and feels for about 48 hours, a flicker of worth before the silence rushes back in, and they begin chasing the next marker. You didn't become an overachiever because you were ambitious. You became an overachiever because somewhere inside you, you still believe that being enough requires proof, and the proof is never quite sufficient. That is not a character flaw. That is a wound wearing the costume of a strength. There is something else, something quieter, something that lives in the body rather than the mind. Researchers who study adverse childhood experiences have found something that should be more widely known. The impact of emotional neglect and emotional abuse in childhood doesn't just live in memory. It lives in the body's stress response systems in the way cortisol is produced, in the baseline state of the nervous system, in the physical experience of being in certain emotional situations. Survivors of narcissistic parenting often describe a physical reaction to conflict that feels disproportionate to the actual situation, a slight edge in someone's voice, and the stomach drops, an unreturned message and the chest tightens, a moment of disapproval from someone they care about, and something in them goes into full emergency mode. Not because the present moment is dangerous, but because the body is remembering a time when it was. The body doesn't distinguish between memory and present reality. It responds to familiar emotional signals the way it originally learned to respond to them. And so even as the adult mind knows logically that this is fine, this is safe, this person is not my parent, the body is already mobilizing, already bracing, already preparing for the worst version of what comes next. This is not overreaction. This is the body doing its job, the job it was trained to do, faithfully for years, and learning to gently work with that response, rather than against it through breath, through grounding, through the slow accumulation of experiences that contradict the original learning is some of the most important healing work there is. Your body is not betraying you. It is protecting you the only way it knows how, with the information it was given before you were old enough to give it better information, and that information can be updated. It takes time, it takes patience, but it can be updated. The children of narcissistic parents often describe a feeling that is difficult to name, a sense that they don't fully exist, or that their existence is somehow contingent on someone else's acknowledgement. Psychologists call this an impaired sense of self, but survivors know it more intimately than any clinical term can reach. The children of narcissistic parents often describe a feeling that is difficult to name, fait euro, a sense that they don't fully exist, or that their existence is somehow contingent on someone else's acknowledgement. Psychologists call this an impaired sense of self, but survivors know it more intimately than any clinical term can reach. It is the feeling of not knowing what you actually want, fait euro, separate from what others want from you. It is the experience of standing in front of a menu, and genuinely not knowing what you feel like eating, because for so long your preferences were irrelevant, unasked for, or met with ridicule. It is the strange vertigo of someone asking you what you enjoy, and feeling a kind of blankness where the answer should be, because the question was rarely asked, and when it was, the honest answer was rarely safe to give. This is what narcissistic parenting does at its deepest level. It doesn't just wound the child, it interrupts the development of the self. It inserts itself into the architecture of identity formation during the exact years when that architecture is being built. The child who should have been discovering what they love, what they believe, who they are, fait euro, was instead spending that developmental energy on managing someone else's emotional world, learning someone else's preferences, becoming whoever they needed to be in order to receive something that resembled safety. Here is what most people never realize about the inner critic that follows survivors of narcissistic parenting into adulthood. It isn't just a voice that criticizes, it is a voice that was specifically tuned to echo the parent's frequency, fait euro, because internalizing the critic was safer than being blindsided by them. If you criticized yourself first harshly enough, there was nothing left for them to use against you. The inner critic was a shield, a preemptive strike. It moved inside you because inside was the one place you had any control, and now it lives there, permanent, relentless. Criticizing the way you spoke in a meeting 3 days ago, replaying the moment you said the slightly wrong thing at dinner, holding you to a standard that shifts constantly Fey-Euro, exactly the way their standard always shifted Fey-Euro, so that peace is never quite available, and rest always has to be earned. The mind doesn't forget, it just learns to carry the original threat on the inside, where it can't be taken by surprise again. And there is one more layer that rarely gets talked about, one that survivors often discover only later, sometimes much later. Narcissistic parenting doesn't just shape the child who receives it, it shapes the entire family system around the narcissist. Siblings are frequently divided into roles: Fey-Euro, the golden child, who can do little wrong, and the scapegoat, who carries the blame for everything. These roles are not chosen by the children, they are assigned, and they shift sometimes, depending on who is most useful to the parent in any given season. The golden child learns that their worth is tied to their status Fey-Euro, and lives in quiet terror of losing it. The scapegoat learns that they are the family's problem Fey-Euro, and carries that identity long after they've left the home. And in many families, both roles live inside the same child at different times in different ways. What this creates between siblings is not the bond of shared survival. It frequently creates competition, suspicion, and distance Fey-Euro. Because the parent has made love a resource that must be competed for, rather than a given that all children share equally. The sibling relationship, which should have been a refuge, becomes another arena. Understanding this Fey-Euro not to assign blame to siblings, but to see the architecture of what was built around you. Fey-Euro can be one of the more quietly releasing realizations of the healing process. You were not the problem between you and your sibling either. You were both children inside a system that was designed, consciously or not, to keep you divided. Because divided children are easier to control. Because children who have each other are children who have a source of love that isn't dependent on the parent. The narcissistic parent doesn't fracture sibling bonds out of malice necessarily. They fracture them because unity is a threat to a system built on dependency, and knowing that, for some people, begins to open a door that has been closed for a very long time. Now let's talk about the generation after you, because one of the deepest fears that survivors of narcissistic parenting carry is this: what if I repeat it? What if, despite everything I know, despite everything I've been through, I become the very thing that shaped me? This fear is actually a sign of something important. It is a sign of self-awareness of the very quality that narcissistic individuals most fundamentally lack. The fact that you are afraid of becoming this tells you something true about who you are. And here is what the research actually shows. Survivors of narcissistic parenting, who do not address the patterns they inherited, are at elevated risk of repeating cycles, not because they are destined to, but because unexamined patterns replicate. The nervous system defaults to what it knows. The parenting you received becomes the internal template for the parenting you give, in the absence of conscious intervention. But conscious intervention changes that equation entirely. The parent who recognizes their own wounds, who can sit with the discomfort of being triggered by their child's needs, rather than acting on it, who can choose to respond rather than react, who can hold space for their child's emotions, even when their own history makes that feel threatening, that parent is actively breaking a chain. It is not perfect parenting that breaks cycles. It is aware parenting. It is the willingness to look honestly at what you are carrying, and do the work of carrying it differently. You do not have to be the perfect parent to be the parent that ends the generational pattern. You only have to be the one who is willing to look. That willingness, that courage is not small. It is enormous. And it is exactly the thing that changes what the next generation inherits. Because this is where it becomes most painful, most confusing, and most important to understand. When you grow up with a parent who withdraws love as punishment, who uses warmth as a reward and silence as a weapon, who loves you most when you are performing and least when you simply need, you develop a very specific map of what love looks and feels like. Love feels unpredictable. Love feels contingent. Love is something you have to earn and can lose at any moment. Love always has an undertow of potential withdrawal running beneath it, even when the surface is calm, and so you arrive in adult relationships carrying that map, and you navigate by it without realizing it. The partner who is consistent and kind and presents your nervous system doesn't know what to do with them. The absence of chaos registers, strangely, as the absence of passion. The steadiness feels somehow suspicious. You find yourself wondering when they'll show their real self, when the warmth will get taken away, when you'll finally be asked to earn it. And the partner who runs hot and cold, who loves you extravagantly on Tuesday, and pulls away on Thursday without explanation, feels, in the body, like coming home. Not because it is good, but because it is familiar, and the nervous system does not distinguish between familiar and healthy. It only knows familiar from unfamiliar. You don't keep choosing painful love because you think you deserve pain. You keep choosing familiar love because your nervous system has never been taught that quiet, consistent love is real. This is not a flaw in your character. This is conditioning. And conditioning, unlike character, can be changed. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. You were a child. You had no power, no alternatives, and no framework for understanding what was happening to you. You did what children do, you adapted. You bent yourself into whatever shape the environment required. You became smaller, or louder, or more perfect, or more invisible. None of that was weakness. Every single one of those adaptations was intelligent. It was your mind and your body working together to protect you inside a situation you had no power to change. The tragedy isn't that you adapted. The tragedy is that the adaptation never got the message that the situation had changed. It calcified into identity, into things you call personality traits, into things you apologize for, into things that have cost you relationships and peace and access to your own joy. The cruelest thing narcissistic parenting does is not what it puts in you. It is what it prevents from growing. The confidence that should have taken root. The self-trust that should have been watered. The sense of being inherently, unconditionally worthy, not because of performance, not because of achievement, not because of how well you manage someone else's feelings. Simply because you exist, and existing is sufficient. That was supposed to be given to you freely. In the earliest years of your life, it wasn't. And everything you've been chasing since then has been an attempt to generate from the outside what should have been planted on the inside. It doesn't work that way. And somewhere in you, you already know that. You've reached enough milestones to understand that the feeling of arrival never lasts. So here's the reframe. And I want you to hear it carefully, because it is the foundation everything else has to be built on. The patterns you carry, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the relentless inner critic, the difficulty trusting calm love, the hollow feeling after achievement, these are not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. They are evidence that something happened to you, that something was done to you, before you were old enough to protect yourself from it. That distinction is not just semantic. You cannot heal what you are still blaming yourself for. You cannot rebuild a sense of self while simultaneously treating yourself as the proof of your own unworthiness. The work begins slowly, non-linearly, in ways that don't always feel like progress, with separating what was given to you from what is actually true about you. The voice that says you are too much, not enough, undeserving, difficult, dramatic, that voice did not originate in you. It was placed there by someone who needed you manageable. Someone whose own wounds required you to stay small so they could stay comfortable. Here is something important to understand about narcissistic parents. They are not, at their core, powerful. They are profoundly fragile. The grandiosity, the need for control, the withdrawal of love as punishment. These are not the behaviors of someone who is whole. These are the behaviors of someone who is deeply, desperately afraid, and who never developed the capacity to manage that fear without using the people closest to them to do it. That does not excuse what happened. It does not minimize the damage, but it recontextualizes the story, because the story you were told silently, through 1,000 interactions, was that their treatment of you reflected your value. It didn't. It reflected their wound. You were never the problem. You were always the child trying to survive one. Now comes the part that is harder than understanding, and that is feeling it. Because you can understand this intellectually, you can nod along, feel the recognition, agree with all of it, and still wake up tomorrow morning with the dread in your chest, and the inner critic running, and the familiar reflex to manage everyone around you before they have a chance to withdraw. Understanding is the beginning, but the nervous system doesn't heal through understanding. It heals through experience, through accumulation of moments in which safety is actually felt, not just believed. This is why therapy, specifically therapy with someone who understands trauma and attachment, can be so profound for people who grew up in narcissistic homes. Not because the therapist tells you who you are, but because a consistent, safe, non-conditional relationship is often the first environment in which a survivor can begin to actually experience what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who does not need you to perform, manage, or shrink. That experience begins to recalibrate the system. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the body learns, through repetition, that safety is possible, that someone can be consistent without an ulterior motive, that love can be quiet without being absent. Grief is also part of this. Real grief, not performance of grief. Grief for the parent you needed and deserved and didn't have. Grief for the childhood that should have felt like safety. Grief for the years you spent chasing validation that was never going to come from the one source you most needed it from. That grief is not self-pity. It is the honest acknowledgement of a real loss, and it deserves space. You do not have to hurry through it. You do not have to justify it. You do not have to be over it on any particular timeline. Healing doesn't look like never being triggered again. It looks like the distance between triggered and returned, getting slightly shorter until one day you realize you came back to yourself faster than you ever have before. That is what progress looks like. Not the absence of the wound, the shortening of the journey from lost to found. There is something I want to say directly to you now, not to a general audience, to you. You have been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and you have mostly carried it alone because the nature of this kind of childhood is that the people who should have helped you carry it were the source of it. There was nowhere to put it down, there was no one to explain it, so you carried it, and you kept going, and you made something out of yourself in spite of it, or perhaps because of it, or perhaps in complicated ways that are both. That took more than people know, more than you may have ever let yourself acknowledge. You are not broken, you are not too much, or not enough, or fundamentally unlovable. Those were someone else's fears, projected onto you at an age when you couldn't deflect them. They are not the truth about you, they never were. The version of you that exists beneath the survival strategies, beneath the hypervigilance, and the people-pleasing, and the endless performance, that version is not damaged. It is simply waiting for enough safety to finally come forward, and slowly, through the work of understanding and grieving and experiencing something different, it will. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to not know what someone is thinking, and let that uncertainty just be. You are allowed to receive love without dismantling it, looking for the trap. You are allowed to rest without earning it first. You are allowed to have preferences, to say no, to disappoint someone without treating it as a catastrophe, to be imperfect in a room full of people and not need to immediately manage everyone's response. You are allowed to exist not as a function, not as a performance, not as a reflection of someone else's needs, but as yourself, fully messily. Without apology, the patterns won't dissolve overnight. The inner critic won't go quiet because you've decided it should. The nervous system won't stand down in a single moment of clarity. But something shifts when you finally see it clearly. When you can look at the hypervigilance and say that came from somewhere real, and it kept me safe. When you can look at the people-pleasing and say that was intelligent once, and I am learning something new now. When you can look at the hollow feeling after achievement, and say that is not my emptiness, that is the gap where unconditional love was supposed to be planted. The most radical thing a person raised by a narcissist can do is decide slowly, imperfectly, against every instinct they were given, that they were always worth loving exactly as they were. Not the version that performed perfectly. Not the version that managed everyone's feelings. Not the version that earned it. The one underneath all of that. The one who was always there,